When I went to a seminary, there was not one class available in the mid-'70s on leadership. Not one. And when I finished my doctoral work, finishing it up in around 2000, I was feeling this leadership of the Lord to just begin a journey of leadership. And I had gotten close to 2 or 3 of my professors. And I set up individual meetings with them and thanked them for their influence in my life. And I said, I'm fixing to begin a leadership journey for myself and hopefully for others. Do you have any counsel or wisdom for me? I'll never forget all 3 of those seminary professors. 2 of them were relatively new out of pastorates and had been at seminary teaching for a couple of years. And they all kind of dropped their head and then they looked up and said, Jimmy, one of the embarrassing things of my ministry, and I felt like God blessed, and I had successful ministries in the churches I was in, I never did anything to develop leadership. And I regret that. So I said, I guess that means you don't have any advice for me. And they said, no, I never did it, and I should have. So I began to do a lot of, work, reading, prayer, and research, and eventually pulled together what I did at our church for somewhere between 12 and 15 years. It was at that point, it evolved into including the ladies, but it was a men only. And we met at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning, and we met for close to 2 to 2.5 hours. So you really find out who's committed, right? That time on Sunday morning, because some of those folks had other responsibilities at church that particular morning, either played in the orchestra, sang in the choir, or taught a Bible study class, and what have you. So that's kind of how things got started, and we did that for many, many years. But I began to see a gap in the marketplace leaders in our churches, which outside of the university and the collegiate experience, the greatest field for evangelism is the marketplace. And I just didn't feel like me, our church, we were doing anything to help our leaders, marketplace leaders, to make a greater difference for Christ in their own families, in their own companies, with their clients, with their vendors, to make a difference. And I felt that they were eager for that. And as it turned out, I was right. They were. So I say all that to preface what I'm going to share today are 4 of the 8 sessions, and these are, frankly, the sessions that I do in marketplace environment, not in the church environment. Now, I don't go into any place where I don't know that the leadership that I'm speaking to, especially the senior leadership, are not believers. So I know they're open. But I also know I got sprinkled in the room men and women that are not necessarily believers. So it enables me to go in. One, they know I'm a pastor, so they expect something from a spiritual perspective. So it kind of opens the door. So sprinkled all the way through this will be some verses, will be some stories. But I wanted to say up front, usually my audience is marketplace, which most of you, maybe none of you really are anymore. You're either church leaders, either vocational leaders or lay leaders. So I'm not going to apologize that, it may not be as biblical as you want it to be, but I think you'll find at the end it was biblical enough. Just remember who my audience normally is. I've been doing this in I guess you could say in a secular environment now for almost a decade. And I do, I did, it's 9 weeks for the evaluation. I do 3 or 4 of these a year, so it's almost always happening. Okay, you're just going to get overload today with 4 hours of it all at once. Okay, so hopefully, it won't be too much, but you'll get the thing. But if you look in your table of contents in the book, I want to let you know, so when you go back to it, you'll know where the reading are, where to read. Chapters 1 and 2, the need to be a leader worth following, developing leaders worth following. That's going to be session 1. I call it, It's All About Leadership. We'll get to that in just a minute. Chapters 1 and 2 will be session 1 this morning. Chapter 3 on the character of a leader will be session 2 later in the morning. And then we'll break for lunch. And then chapter 6 on servant leadership will be the session after lunch. And then the last session is about bringing out the best in others. And it's not in the book. It's not in the book. Here's the format that I want us to take, and I hope it's not uncomfortable for you, but I'm going to dispense a lot of information, and I'm more concerned about you taking 1 or 2 thoughts away that you can really begin to immediately apply and make a difference in your personal life, family life, church life, work life, whatever the case may be. And I've discovered one of the best ways to do that is to talk for 30 to 40 minutes and then turn over some discussion questions to the folks who are sitting around the tables, okay, and say, okay, you got about 20 to 30 minutes. You don't have to cover all the questions, but go through some of them, the ones you pick, and let's take 20 to 30 minutes to talk about what am I going to do with this information. Okay, because one of the fallacies, and many of you are preachers and teachers, and you know that, is we're talking heads, and we enjoy prepping and doing that, okay, but rarely is there ever an opportunity for the people out there say, whoa, wait a minute. I don't understand that. Can we talk about this? In fact, probably for most of us, if somebody stood up and did that, we'd probably have a coronary. Okay, but this will give us a chance to provide some discussion, which I do believe will be very helpful. I'm going to deliberately abbreviate the last session, and I'm doing that because I want to be sure before we close today that we have enough time for some Q&A, okay, because I think that would help you maybe further clarification on something that I said. But more importantly, I'm about developing leaders, first myself and then others who want to grow and develop and have a greater impact for Christ. And what I've discovered is that most church leaders are not against doing that, they just don't do that. And what I always hear is, I preach 2 or 3 times a week. I usually have to do 1 or 2 funerals, perhaps, and I have to go to the hospitals. I get it. I get it. But you're the one that chooses, to some degree, your schedule. And if you're not doing something to develop yourself and others as leader, in the long run, you're hurting yourself, not helping yourself. Okay. And unless you're so insecure that you can't afford to have anybody else do something as well or better than you do it, okay, which can happen in the lives of a lot of pastors. So I want to have some time at the end to say, hey, if I were sitting where you were and I wanted to begin some kind of developing of leadership in my life and in the life of leaders and others in my church, here's what I would do if I were you, okay? But I'm not you. But I want to give you an opportunity to at least hear from somebody who's been there and done that anyways, and you can choose whether or not that you want to do it, okay? As I told you, more than 20 years ago, I fell in love with this subject. I believe, and you'll know that I'm convinced of it, that this is one of the most important subjects about your journey and my journey in Christ and a way to have an influence. But at the same time, it's something we rarely spend any time on, and that's leadership. It's leadership. So we're going to spend a day on it, okay? And I think it's going to be energizing and encouraging for you. I know that it's important. I did some research. From Lifeway has a research department, and back in February, I think they do this once or twice a year. They do a thing that they call Lifeway Research. This was 2022, Greatest Needs of Pastors Study. Remember that, Greatest Needs. And they send out a blog every week. And this came out in February, and I kept it because I knew this was coming. And this was pastors being asked, what are your greatest needs? And I'll just read a paragraph, in order. More than 3 in 4 pastors, 77% to be honest, say developing leaders and volunteers is their number one need. And number 2, fostering connections with unchurched people was a close second at 76%. Third, and I'm not sure the difference in 3 and 1, training current leaders and volunteers, 68%. Challenging people where they lack obedience, 55%. And about 45% said establishing a compelling vision for their congregation. In that order. I don't disagree with any of that by my experience at all. But if you look at those top 5, all but maybe the second one, and it loosely does, has a common denominator. Leadership. Developing yourself and developing others as leaders. So I'm hoping today will help. Here's the discouraging news according to Barna, and I think they do good research. Barna says that approximately 1 in 20, that's about 5%, 1 in 20 evangelical pastors see leading as one of their responsibilities. May I repeat, 1 in 20 evangelical pastors see leading as one of their primary responsibilities. They see teaching, preaching, pastoral care, all important responsibilities. But leading way down the list, and 1 in 20. My observation over the years of almost 50 years in ministry in the church, and now in marketplace leadership, generally speaking, people in places of responsibility and quote leadership have occasionally got in trouble for moral issues. Occasionally, whether it was the church or whether it was in the marketplace, maybe for financial impropriety, for character reasons, but it's really rare. But where they got in trouble, and many eventually lost their responsibilities or got forced to move on, was a failure in leading well. And that's what got them in trouble. They didn't lead well. My observation, I am a teacher. It's my primary spiritual gift. So I can say this. I believe most of our churches, small, medium, and large, don't make any difference, are overtaught and underled. We're teaching our people to death, which is not a bad thing. But if we taught them how to lead, how to have influence without position, without title, without authority, but how to make a difference and have influence, which is, you'll see, is what I believe leadership really is, then what might our impact be evangelistically and in terms of making disciples? I think it would be far larger. So, with that as, I guess, the backdrop, I want to begin this first session, which is on It's All About Leadership. So we're going to be pretty interactive at times. I'm going to do some things on the whiteboard here as well, getting some input from you. But I want to begin. This is kind of the first session. It's all about leadership. Question: what is it's? What's it's? It's what?
Church, I think it's the thing that a growing church needs. Those things that will reach people. Okay. We're not about just sitting and listening to the pastor every Sunday. We've got to get out and work ourselves.
Okay.
We've got to ask people to come. We've got to start leading people to Jesus and tell them, I know a church that...
It's about going and inviting. It includes it's. What else is it's? Think big.
I've always believed that Christian life is taking what your experience with Christ from church out into the world, because church is only training camp. And I've told people this for over 30 years, that this is just training camp. We're learning how to go out into the world and tell people that they have a need for Christ, and show them they have a need for Christ, but then also showing them how to meet that need that they have. And it's just, you know,
So it's taking the message out there.
taking it outside the church.
About developing leaders.
It's about developing leaders.
About leadership,
It's,
not developing leaders.
Robert, you're wanting to say what?
Well, according to the book, it's all about leadership, but I can say that there's not a time that I've been successful or a time that I've failed if leadership wasn't the issue in the situation.
Yeah.
I mean, flat out.
All right, let me ask the question a different way, okay? Before you jump out there, think. Okay, don't let your mouth get ahead of your brain. What isn't about leadership? What isn't about leadership? Look at your own personal life. Look in the mirror. Is it about leading you? You don't lead yourself well, you will not have people want to follow you much.
That's right.
So it's got to start there. Some of you work in the marketplace, or maybe you did at one point in time, or you have men and women that work in the marketplace. Is leadership important in the marketplace? What about in the home? Okay. What about in the local church? Okay. What about on we're in the NBA conference finals? Certain players taking lead roles. I mean, I can stand here for the next 3 or 4 hours and name venues and industries and everything else, and they all will rise or fall on the ability of the people to lead. It's all about leadership. Everything, as I think Maxwell said, rises and falls on leadership. Everything does, and we tend to think too small when it comes to the subject of leaders, because we tend to limit leadership to title and position. And most of us in this room have been around long enough to know this. I have met and known a lot of people who had titles, who had positions, who had authority, but they were not leaders. They were not leaders. But I have also, as you have, known a lot of folks who were leaders, who were influential, impactful, made a difference, a positive difference, and they probably still don't have a title or position. But when they speak, we listen. When they speak, we listen. We have restricted what leadership is, and I think it's hurt us. It's hurt us. It's true in the church where I've served. It's true here, and it's true in every church. There are men and women in your church who maybe have had titles, deacon or elder or Sunday school teacher or chairman of this or chairman of that. But there are some that may have never had a title or don't have one right now. But when they speak, people listen. That's leadership. That's influence. If leadership doesn't make all the difference, let me give you a challenge. Go home, lead yourself poorly, lead your family poorly, abysmally, go back to your job and intentionally lead in an awful manner, and please email me and let me know how that goes. It won't go well. It won't go well. Because leadership matters. Terribly, matters. Now, let me ask you, I'm going to begin by asking you, broadly speaking, generally speaking, how would you describe the general condition? What words, adjectives, descriptive terms would you use to describe the general condition of leadership in America? Okay, you got to. We're hearing aids for a reason, so you're going to need to speak up. Abysmal. Okay, I'm running out of height. Weak. Sick. Pardon?
Without direction.
I'll just put just kind of lost.
Divide and conquer.
I'm sorry?
Divide and conquer.
I think there's a huge gap. A huge gap. A gap between where our leaders are and there's nothing behind it. There's a gap. There are people who.
Unfocused.
Well, I think that may be true for some, but I think the greater problem is they are focused. Just on the wrong things. They're focused. There's an agenda. They're not lacking direction. They're not lacking. What?
Transactional.
Oh, excellent. Not relational, but transactional. I'll do something for you if you do something for me.
Which makes it corrupt.
What? Corrupt. Self-absorbed. Okay, and yada, 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 yada. I have asked that question in the most secular environments you can imagine, and in most Christian environments you can imagine. And now, for more than a decade, and that in what you just shared is what I've always heard. I taught in the MBA program at UCF for years. You talk about a secular audience, okay? That's what they say. This is their picture of leadership in America. I wish I had time to give you a history lesson on that's not always been true, okay? But it is true. I honestly don't see that changing, to be very honest, probably not in my lifetime anyways, and perhaps even worsening, and there are reasons for that. That are taking place, but that's kind of the picture. The Harvard Center for Leadership every year, and has for the last 25 to 30 years, does a survey of how Americans perceive leadership in the country. And I watched it for years. I went back even prior to having a love for leadership. And it's pretty much stayed the same, somewhere between 68 and 74%. Say there is a crisis, this is a quote, a crisis in leadership in America. No kidding. Public confidence has never been lower in leadership in almost every industry or venue, including the local church. Including the local church. So, this is the condition. Now, here's that 70% of the Harvard Center for Leadership. So it's kind of the average over the years. Next question is, why are leaders important? What is missing if we don't have leaders? Not necessarily titled, but if somebody is not leading, input, what is missing?
Strategy and plan.
Okay, missing a strategy, plan. Do you mind if I could just kind of put that under one word? Vision, sense of direction, okay? Leaders tend to be a little bit more of a visionary type person. Sometimes they have a strategy side to them, okay, but oftentimes they don't. They just kind of see the big picture, but how to get there. That was a unique relationship that I had with my first pastor, Jim Henry, and then with David Youth as well. They're both high visionary persons, okay? But I'm a strategist and a planner, okay? And it made a good tandem there. I could always say, where do you want the ship to go? Okay? And I say, okay, well, you give me 2 months or 3 months, okay, and I'll come back to you with a plan or strategy, and we can pick it apart, and you can own it. But leadership provides both to some degree, just some have different strengths. Why are leaders important?
Example.
Where there is no vision, the people perish.
Well, and that goes back to here. There's chaos. Okay, there's lack of direction.
It's simply a biblical precept.
Sure, leadership is important because you can go to page 1, okay, and God is leading, as it were, Himself. But somewhere in that process, He made Adam and Eve, and you can move forward humanity, and there's always been the role of leadership. There are a few concepts more biblical than leadership. Okay, what else? Why are leaders important?
They multiply.
They multiply. What's missing? What's missing without leader?
Health. Like a healthy marriage, health is missing.
Health.
Leadership's not in marriage, then health is missing. Same with the church.
I'm trying to find the word for it, but past the vision and all, that spark that starts the engine, that gets things going.
I'll use the word inspiration or motivation.
What makes it happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no replacement coming behind you without leadership.
There is no replacement.
I mean, if you're not leading, you're not, in business, you always were preparing somebody to take your place.
You would think that. That's a whole different thing. I meet monthly, and I have for 6 years, with 20 to 25 men who own their businesses. Okay? And a handful of them have put in place a strategy to hand things off either to a son or an assist or a VP or something like that. But what might surprise you, okay, is about a third of those men, 7 or 8 of them, all in their 60s, have done nothing. And the conversation has propelled them to begin to think about doing something. But 6 or 7 of them said they'll figure it out when I die. I said, I could call out my name. You mean to tell me you found this company 25, 30, 40 years ago? You've invested your entire life in this company, okay, and you're willing to die and let it. And he said, yeah. And I told him privately, you're a fool. But well, leadership is important. I think there's some things that are part of leadership that we haven't talked about. And one of my favorite words that are leaders' responsibility is what I call engagement. Okay? We have non-participants in our churches. Okay? Some of them are C&E Christians. They show up Christmas and Easter and that's it. If that, but not even as much of that as it used to be. But we all have in our churches the bulk of our people, regardless of the size, that show up, but that's their involvement. They show up. They might give something, maybe every now and then, but not serving, not witnessing. I mean, and that word, just show up, describes a lot of our people. These are good people, know the Lord. I get it. Okay, some are involved. They give regularly. They work with the children. They work with the teenagers. They have a place of responsibility as a deacon or on a team. They serve in the food service area. They're more participatory. I use the word engaged to even go deeper. Engaged people, okay, have a sense of ownership. Ownership. They would be there if the pastor's out. They would be there if the pastor resigned under good or bad terms and moved on. They would be there and give because they are engaged in a kingdom priority. They're engaged. We don't have a lot of engaged church members. We all wish we had more, but we could probably count maybe on a hand or two of those men and women that are engaged, but we really love them, those engaged folks. Leaders, good leaders, create engagement. Engagement. Not just followership, but engagement. Okay? Now, so they're important for, so if leadership is important, then it behooves us to become effective at it. If it's important. So let me give you a visual to talk about this business of how to be more effective as a leader. All right? Effectiveness is driven by two things. By your leadership ability, your leadership aptitude, your leadership knowledge. What do you know and understand about leadership? In this case, biblical leadership. What do you know? But it's also driven by what I call success dedication, and that is the willingness to make the commitment, to make the sacrifice, to provide the dedication that is absolutely necessary to get the job done. Where those intersect creates effectiveness. Just stay with me for a second. Let's imagine that on an understanding scale of knowledge of what leadership really is and does, that we've got somebody that's a 1. But let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, there's an 8 in their dedication, sacrifice, commitment, and willingness. This would measure their effectiveness. You with me? Okay. Question. If I wanted to increase the effectiveness, the impact, what can I do? I only got two options. I got two options. One, I can work harder, put in more hours, be more dedicated, make more sacrifice, take more risk. Only problem with that, especially as you age, it's not sustainable. Just not sustainable. So that only leaves me one other option, and that's to get better at understanding what leadership is and does. That's why things like today is important. Let's say we move somebody to a 6, which is average. But you've increased their leadership effectiveness several 100%. And you've only moved their leadership knowledge, understanding, aptitude, attitude up a little. Okay? This was a decision that I made back around 2000 when God laid on my heart leadership. And I made a decision, and I'm going to challenge you with that later today, and that's this. I made a decision that I would spend, I talked to you about it, I would spend a minimum of 3 hours a week developing my understanding of leadership and my leadership skills. Okay? And I did that for more than a decade. I read 3 to 5 books a week. Okay, now, I didn't sit in the lead role. I know that matters. But I had plenty of job, trust me. Plenty of job. So there's going to have to be some level of commitment in order to increase your leadership ability. Here's the principle. Leadership ability largely determines, your knowledge and ability largely will determine your overall influence, your effectiveness, and your success as defined by God. Success as defined by God. So today is about hopefully beginning to change the trajectory of your interest and willingness to become more of a student of leadership. Okay? Leadership doesn't just make a difference, it is the difference. Okay? I promise you, and I'll say this again at the end, I promise you, if you get on a leadership commitment in your own personal journey to read, to grow, to interview, whatever, all other things we'll talk about later on, if you do that, I'll promise you, if you're not making a greater difference where you lead, okay, then you don't ever have to study leadership ever again the rest of your life. But if you do that for the next year, it'll be a game changer. You have to carve out some time, and we'll talk about what that looks like for sure. Okay, now, let's talk a little bit about what leadership is. And I just picked the mark. This is also in Matthew and Luke, where it talks about, and Jesus appointed the 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him, and he sent them out to preach. This is what I think how Jesus defined leadership. Okay, I don't think it has to be difficult. I don't think it has to be hard. I know when I was, first of all, beginning to study, I came across somewhere around 300 different definitions of leadership. It's not that hard. It just simply isn't that hard. A leader is a person, obviously, okay, who influences. Influence can be positive. In our world, we hope that it is, but it isn't always that way. It's positive. It's empowering. It's multiplying. It's encouraging. It's adding value. It's elevating people. It's liberating people. But the negative side of that could be, using people, intimidating people, and having a negative influence to achieve a purpose, a purpose. I like what Ken Blanchard said, who in his 90s became a strong believer for the last 20 to 25 years and probably one of the most respected leadership experts in the world. He said, leadership is the process of influence. Anytime you seek to influence the attitude, beliefs, and behaviors of someone else, you have assumed the role of leadership. Let me say it again. Leadership is a process of influence. And anytime you seek to influence the attitudes, beliefs, feelings, behaviors of someone else, you have assumed the role of a leader. I'll guarantee you this. Since you and I got up this morning, or if we were in our regular responsibilities, we have done pretty much one thing all day long. And that's to try some way, form, or fashion to influence the attitudes, feelings, actions, and behaviors of somebody that we were in contact with. Whether it's our spouse, our kids, a coworker, it's what we do. Jimmy, you're saying that to some degree everyone's a leader. Yes. Yes. Some are not very good at it. Okay? And some are more negative than positive, but they've been trying to influence the attitudes, feelings, beliefs, and behaviors of someone. Now, going back to this, just a question. Because I believe Scripture is inerrant, infallible, and I believe it says what it says and means what it says. Now, sometimes we have trouble understanding what it means. Okay, and that's the human element of it. But I believe the order of what Jesus says is important. I don't believe it's by accident. Okay? I believe it was his pure intent to help us to understand that he appointed, he influenced, and he, first of all, so that they might be with him. That's relational. That's people. And that he might send them out to preach. That's purpose. That's direction. Okay, so let me move forward. Leadership is first relational and then directional, and that's where the world's got it all backwards. And if we're not careful, we get it backwards in the church. Here's what I know by experience. If you do this one well, this one will do well. And the people will go with you. And they will help you do it. You can do this one. But there could be some collateral damage along the way, relationally. It would be a game changer for most of us if we would just realize leadership, listen, is less about the results and more about the relationships. And if we did a better job with the relationships, we would get better results. That's critical. In fact, you may not agree with this statement. I don't think any leader, especially at a mid to a high level in an organization, whether it's a church or marketplace, I don't think any leader is responsible for the results. But I do think they are responsible for the people who are responsible for the results. And there's a difference. And I tell you what, realizing that maxim is a stress reducer. When you no longer feel like the results are up to me. No, the results are up to the people you lead. And if you lead them well, the results will come. And if you do that well, when you leave, and you do know all leadership is interim. All. The question is not are you leaving, it's when. But you are leaving. You may retire, you may die, but you're leaving. The real results and impact of your life, your leadership and influence will not be known until you're gone. But if you leave and things fail, you were at fault. You didn't lead well. You made it all about you. You built it all on you because of your own insecurities. Made it all about you. Leadership is first relational and then directional. Here's another way to say it. Leadership is not about being in charge, which we tend to think it is. But it's more about taking care of the people in your charge. That's right. So, here's a picture of what I've just talked about. Here's the person, the leader, titled or untitled, okay, whose influence, that could be positive or negative, building up or tearing down. There's always got to be people in the equation. It's always to achieve or to complete some goal or purpose. That's what leadership does. But there's a kind of a dotted line here, not invisible, that's happening in the person that's the leader, that's not happening in the people. And you brought it up, Brother did here. And there are two things that are going on, okay, which are really the difference makers in leadership, and that is vision with clarity and purpose. It may not be totally clear, and the further you go out in vision, the less clarity there usually is. But tied along with that, as I've got resolve, maybe a better word is courage. Courage. It takes courage to lead. All right? I wish I had time to talk to you about that, because most of us have a misunderstanding of where courage comes from. We wrongly believe that it's something we muster up, as it were, within ourselves. And that's not true. We get courage from others. Okay, it's a whole different teaching, but this is the resolve and the courage. Okay, so question. I'm gonna go back to the board here. I want you to, for a moment, I want you to think about men and women in your life. You can go back to your parents, grandparents, coaches, teachers, peers, now, whatever. I'm going to ask you this question. What are the qualities of the best leader that you have personally ever known? What are the qualities of the best leaders that you have personally ever known? Maybe even you may even work for them or served under them. Okay? I don't need a name, but I need qualities. Pastor?
Biblically decisive.
Biblically decisive. By that, do you mean they believe the Bible is the Word of God?
Now, they're able to respond to a situation with clarity regarding a biblical worldview.
Okay, so let me tweak that, because I agree with you. I'm going to put biblically responsive. They respond with, this is what God says.
Exactly.
This is what God says. Okay? Okay?
Integrity.
Integrity.
Humility.
Ooh.
Very gentle.
Gentle? Gentle? Okay.
Show versus tell. Show versus tell. They showed it, they demonstrated versus just talking.
I don't have time. Yes, show versus tell. Ask also versus tell. Ask. Ask. Ask questions. Be curious. Okay? Because your role is to develop them. Okay? And sometimes you get more out of asking than even showing. Both are important. Got it. Okay. All right. Other qualities.
Took an interest in me, not just what my job was.
Personal interest in you as a person, first and foremost. Okay? Pat Lencioni, who is a believer, one of his earlier books, he talks about how to know you're in the wrong job. And one of those has to do with the fact that your boss, your company does not take interest in you personally. Okay? They only see your value in what you produce. Okay? Yes, sir?
It's about flaws and weaknesses.
Flawed. All are. Yeah. All are flawed, right?
Listener?
Mm-hmm.
Listener?
Listener.
Oh, yes. We'll talk more about that this afternoon.
Dedication. Dedication.
Dedicated. Yeah. These and more. People with these qualities, you and I will let them into our lives to influence us if they never have a title, if they never have a position, because it's these things and others that produce the game changer. Trust. Trust is the game changer. And we live in a world of low and moving lower trust, even in the church world. Trust. And I'll talk a little bit more this afternoon. Okay? These things and others make someone what I call a leader worth following. So, how do you become a leader worth following? These I have reduced based on Psalm 78, 72. This is my life leadership verse. And David shepherded them. First of all, context. David's not writing this. That would be very proud and arrogant. A man by the name of Asaph is writing this about David. Okay? Flawed David, by the way. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands. Notice the last phrase, he led them. When I read that some now 20 plus years ago, I asked myself the question, what was it about David that Asaph observed that brought him to the conclusion that David was a leader? And broad brush, three things jumped off the page. One, integrity of heart. Integrity of heart. Honesty. Word is their bond. Keep their promises. Follow through. Whole, complete. We'll talk about that next session, frankly. With skillful hands, competent. They know what they do well. They don't try to do everything well. They know what they do well, and they do it exceptionally well. They're willing to hand off the things they're not good at to others. Okay? And then third is shepherded them. Huge, as you know, the Bible teachers, huge motif in teachings about David being a shepherd and everything that goes with that in regards to the sheep. So what does it take to be a leader that people want to follow, not have to follow? Big difference. Authentic character. This answers the question that they're asking. Can I trust you? Can I trust you? Exceptional competence. Can you help me? Relational connection, shepherded them. Do you care for me as a person, personally, first? These three big rocks, I think, define someone who is a leader worth following. Now, I want you to notice as I wrap up, the mathematical sign here is not plus, but multiplication. Why? Because I want to send a message first to me. Okay? Because if any one of these is a zero, technically not going to happen. I get that. But if any one of these three components is a zero, what does that mean? Zero. Zero. Okay? All of these are important. I think this is foundational. This is foundational. I think this is a very, very close second. Relational connection, building relationships with people. And I think this is third. But we live in a world, both in the marketplace and in the church place, that this one, especially for the senior leader, are they competent to teach and preach especially? I'm not saying it's not important. It is important, but not the most important. Not the most important. It's authentic character, exceptional competence, and then the relational connection. What we're fixing to do, I'm going to give you, you're going to do some work at the table. But we're going to do some work at the table, and when I come back before lunch, we're going to look at this authentic character. Today, we are not going to look at exceptional competence or relational connection. There are chapters in the book, but I'm not going to spend time on those today. These three are what you need to do to be a leader worth following. This afternoon, we're going to look at servant leadership. If this is what we need to be and do to be a leader worth following, servant leadership is the how we do it. The how that we do it. Okay? All right. Open your packets to the very last section. Let me grab mine. Yeah, I guess it would be the next to the last page. You'll see Session-1. It's all about leadership. Are you there? Okay, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes, okay, right there at your table. If there's three, some of you get there's four here, four. There are 6 questions. I'm not asking you to cover all of them. Maybe just read through the 6, pick out a couple, and discuss those at your table. Okay, discuss those at your table. Those of you that are watching online, they're going to do this for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to take a 15-minute break. So I'm going to say we'll be back live with the next session in, say, 25 or 30 minutes. Okay? So tune back in. See you in a few minutes.